Thank you, everyone. Like they said, my name is Cassandra Hierl, and today I'm going to be talking to you about Alzheimer's disease. There's an old wives' tale that says you shouldn't plant a willow tree. You should just let it occur naturally, or else you'll have bad luck. This never stopped my grandfather, though. He wanted a willow tree, so he went out and planted one in their yard. Sometime later, he got a call from his doctor asking him to come in and talk. And while he was gone, my grandmother took a chainsaw and cut down this willow tree. I tell you this story because I think it really exemplifies the woman that my grandmother was. She was strong and independent and cared so much for her family. She was my biggest role model. She was an incredible tennis player, violinist, and ultimately a loving mother and grandmother. However, this past summer, I lost my grandmother to Alzheimer's disease. Over the last couple years of her life, she lost control of her mind and her body and that independent life she had lived for so long. Yet she was one of the lucky ones. She got to spend the rest of her life at home with her family until the very end. However, most people aren't so fortunate. Over 500,000 people are diagnosed with Alzheimer's disease, or AD, every year. AD hits families hard with its direct medical costs and indirect social costs. And oftentimes, AD diagnoses happen later in the disease's progression, and treatments are most effective early on. You can see how this would present a problem. In order to best empathize with this problem, I think it's important to take a look at the history of AD. AD has been stigmatized all the way back to ancient Rome, where philosopher Cicero attributed it to those with weak will rather than a consequence of aging. In 1797 in France, dementia was first used as a medical term. However, it wouldn't match up today. Despite its long history, AD has been incredibly stigmatized even to this day. Now, AD diagnostics are changing, but the stigma still remains. In fact, a recent study showed that 40% of dementia patients admitted to being discriminated against because of their diagnosis. And this stigma goes deep into the general public, with 70% of people of the public having a negative perception of the disease. This stigma can cause people to not seek out treatment, which would further delay their treatment and cause their symptoms to worsen. In fact, the majority of diagnoses happen based on conversations with your doctor. And because of that, it can be scary. And they'll put it off because of the stigma. And then symptoms will worsen, new symptoms will develop, like trouble with language or agoraphobia, and that step becomes much scarier. As previously mentioned, treatments are most effective early on. However, if you continue to push off diagnosis, your treatment will be continued to push off. Treatments can range anything from a change in living environment to prescriptions and various therapies. When my grandmother was diagnosed, we worked hard to fill her home with family and laughter, life, music, but not every family has that capability, which is why improvement is so crucial. Technology is evolving every single day. Recently, biomarkers have been used to detect if plaques and tangles are present in the brain through PET scans. This technology is allowing AD diagnostics to be quantified. Further technological developments through AI and machine learning have begun to appear, with UC San Francisco developing a technology that allows AD to be detected up to 7 years earlier. They're able to do this with 72% accuracy, and they do this through utilizing their genetic databases of over 5 million people. This database allows them to identify pre-existing conditions that could be predictors for AD. These included hypertension, high cholesterol, and vitamin D deficiencies in both men and women. However, in women alone, osteoporosis proved to be a particularly important predictor as well. These conditions can allow doctors to identify potential for Alzheimer's before symptoms are even present. However, this technology, we've all seen, can get out of hand. Genetic technology has been utilized a lot in the past, but ensuring that understanding is the important part. The lead author made an excellent point, stating that AI is not only about identifying risk as early as possible, but also about understanding the biology behind it. Because after all, the stigmatization of AD was due to its lack of understanding. This technology will have huge impacts on both families with a member with AD, but also for other difficult to diagnose conditions. If I were to think back to 8 years ago, my grandmother would only be 78 years old. I'd be going to her house every summer. We'd be going to restaurants, playing games, watching Jeopardy. She'd get every answer correct. She'd still be able to tell my grandfather his first boss's wife's name or tell me a story about the driving instructor she had when she was 16. If I were to think back to a year ago, my grandmother relied on someone for almost everything. And I love and adore both versions of my grandmother, but I know it was difficult for her. And I know she missed that independent life she had lived for so long. But this technology is not about looking back. It's about remembering to focus on the future and value the people you live with and love today. Thank you.